your device.
Yeah, it's on the cloud now.
Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm happy to welcome you and thank you for taking the opportunity to be here today to congratulate our distinguished author, Ava Homa, for her unique accomplishment and contribution to world literature, and in particular, the literature of diaspora, and more specifically, I would say, the literature of feminism or feminist literature. And again, in particular, the Kurdish feminism. We plan to primarily welcome her, familiarize you with her work through a brief introduction that will be given by Dr. Soraya Fallah, who will be our second, as a matter of fact, guest on these series of talks or panels about Kurdish contributions and diaspora. Hers, of course, is more academic. She recently published, co-authored a book under the title of Learning Challenges for Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Students with Disabilities. Definitely both books have received rave reviews, the second one academically and the second one in literary circles. And as Nima, I would recommend would go to the webpage where some of you would be familiarized with the ways in which you can get the book. You would see some of those reviews. We may just read 2 or 3 of them so that you really get a sense for the magnificent, marvelous contribution that Ava has made to the Kurdish literature and diaspora. And it is really an auspicious occasion. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to meet her in person, to shake hands, to congratulate her, to hawk her for the work that she has done, the fabulous work, which is the fruit of her labor for the past 10 years, and obviously a dedication to a very humble, simple Kurdish teacher who was hanged by the Islamic Republic of Iran 10 years ago. And she had made basically the publication of the book concurrent with the anniversary of that horrible execution. And we will get into a more intimate, basically, conversation about the author, her background, after the short introduction by Dr. Soraya Fallah. After that, Nima would be kind enough to take us to the website that Ava has and familiarize us with the ways in which we can purchase basically the book, and why we should definitely purchase the book, and recommend everyone that we know to get the book. Dr. Fallah, you have it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Amir Sharifi. I appreciate this session. I'm very delighted that I see so many participants. It shows that how people like pay attention and emphasize to such a work that Ava has done. And I'm so I'm very, very glad, and congratulations, Ava. And I'm as a person who knows her for a long time, as a friend and as a person who know in the some activities and literary work, I really admire her, and congratulations again, Ava, again. Very, very welcome. I am glad that we have this series, and we started with very amazing Ava Homa. Most of you might know Ava, but we thought that it's going to be great if you know a little more in detail. So I'm not going to take so much of your time, but I'm going to tell you who is Ava. Ava Homa is a writer, journalist, and activist. Daughters of Smoke and Fire, which was released on May 2020, is her debut novel published by the HarperCollins in Canada and Abrams in the United States. Her collection of short stories, Echoes from the Other Land, from 2010, was published in Toronto, was nominated for the 2011 Franco Corner Short Story Prize and secured place among the 10 winners of the 2011 CBC Reader's Choice Contest. Running concurrently with the Giller Prize, Homa is also the inaugural recipient of the Penn Canada Humber College Writers in Exile Scholarship. In different settings across North America and Europe, Homa has delivered speeches on writing as resistance, human rights, gender equality, Kurdish affairs, media literacy, and other topics. She has a master's degree in creative writing from the University of Windsor in Canada, another in English language and literature from Tehran, Iran, and a diploma in editing from Toronto. A writer in residence at the historic Joy Kogaba House, BC 2013, George Brown College, Toronto 2012, in R.D. Lawrence Cultural Center, Minden Hills in 2011, and the Open Book Toronto and Ontario in 2011. Homa has taught creative writing workshop to writers from diverse age ranges and backgrounds, judged writing contests, and has served the editorial board of the Write magazine, as well as the National Council of the Writers Union in Canada. Please welcome Ava Homa to this session, and we appreciate you're here.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm sure that Ava wants to say a few words. She doesn't want to be the subject and the object of the talk because she is the one who has all the talk. She has created wonderful characters beyond imagination. So she is a woman of words, definitely, when it comes to writing. So if you could just say a few words, Ava, before Nima goes to your website to introduce the book, and then we will engage basically, hopefully, in a engaging conversation about your book and your background.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amir. I just wanted everyone to know that I am so, so grateful that you made the time to be here. I really value your attendance. I look forward to having a conversation with you. I am particularly indebted to Dr. Amir, Dr. Soraya, Nima, all of whom are my favorite people. I love and admire them for who they are and what they stand for. And I feel really, really honored to be speaking with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nima, you should have the link, and once you open the link, you will share the screen with us.
Yeah, I'm doing that right now. Sharing. Let me know if...
Share, since you are the host, you should be able to share easily once that's it, yes.
Okay, let me know if you see it or not.
We see it, but it's not opened yet. You started screen sharing.
It should be open. This is...
Oh, there
you go.
So Ava, please tell me where I should be pointing, if anywhere.
Yeah, I think this is the page and we can see it. Thank you, Nima. If you scroll down, there are a variety of options in purchase links in US and Canada. I would highlight, you can basically get it from anywhere you usually get your books. Although I hope that you will consider supporting your local bookstores and get it from them. You can read reviews, see my videos, read an excerpt, read interviews, and let me know if you have any questions at all.
Yeah, it might be relevant to read some of these reviews to create meaningful context for our conversation. So if you go further down, of course, mainstream publications and magazines have published rave reviews. Definitely you should also write your own review after you read the book. It is a fascinating, basically, book to read, despite, it's really bitter and difficult, topic. It's inspirational. I was sent a copy probably more than 2 months ago, but I couldn't wait to go back to every chapter of the book. And I did write basically a review, which will be hopefully published soon. So if we go down, further down, we see some reviews from Kurds and non-Kurds, those that really captured the spirit of the novel. So
Nima, you should scroll up for reviews.
Going down too much. So for instance, this is by Professor Shahzad Mojab, who is a scholar, a feminist, actually, scholar. I lost it, Nima. Could you go back to the image of Shahzad Mojab? Yeah. Okay, so if you could, that's fine. Daughters of Smoke and Fire is a riveting story of a family that unlocks our imagination to the struggle of being and living as Kurds, an absorbing fiction with social and political insights into Kurdish identity, politics, and women's lives. The audacious character Layla is memorable for her struggle to survive and to stay free. Ava Homa in fiction echoes the real dreams and desires of Kurdish women for freedom. And this is interesting. On the other hand, you have Ambassador Peter Goldberg, who says, at a time when the Kurds are so much in the news in Iraq and Syria, the Iranian government has erected a wall of silence around its own much larger Kurdish population. This magnificent novel penetrates the wall. And that is true. With its story of coming of age, oppression, and death, beautifully written, it is the best new work of fiction to emerge from the Near East in a long time. If you go down or up, I don't know. There are more reviews. I would like to read one more. So one by, for instance, Susan Holbrook, ranging across regions, ethnicities, genders, sexualities, and political dispositions, Homa's characters give us a prismatic portrait of Iran that resists both internal tyrannies and Western demonization. Her style is elegantly sparse, gem solid. This is a voice we all need to hear. And then there's Cabri. Ava Homa is Canada's exquisite answer to Raymond Carver. Homa announces new beginnings, less irony, more hope, and from a breathtakingly multicultural and international perspective, readers will experience awe and beauty at the force of Homa's art to convey female Iranian protagonists wholeheartedly grasping their lives. A taut and subtle plain spokenness enlivens the writing, belying rich dramatic tensions that build just beneath the surface, which will surprise readers and then captivate them. So I think this gives you really a glimpse, a fleeting one, into the marvelous work that Ava has done. And obviously she is known more as a Canadian Kurdish author, even though she temporarily, hopefully permanently, lives in the United States now. So with that introduction, I think if Ava is ready, we could definitely start our conversation.
I'm blushing here. Sure, go ahead.
So anyway, Dr. Soraya talked about your background, but that's your basically official background. What is the real story?
Well, that one was also real.
Your basically childhood. And how was your childhood? You know, I'm curious personally to know how your childhood is different from the protagonists of the Daughters of Smoke and Fire, Leda. I don't want to spoil basically the story. I will just give some hints.
I was born in Tehran at the time. My father was working there, and then he got arrested, put in jail. My mother took me back. I was their first child. Took me back to Kurdistan because she couldn't stay in Tehran on her own. I grew up in a house that was full of books, and we didn't have a whole lot of other distractions. I think that's perhaps the best thing that happened to me. You know, there were no computers, no technology. We didn't even have good TV programs. So it was a lot of free time on my hand after school and a lot of books. And every room in that house you went into was full of books. And so I was an early reader. And from a very young age, I would read like Rumi. I couldn't really understand Maulana that well. I remember looking at a book and having a hard time reading the title, which was Chara insan muta'ahil wa mas'ul ast, and then just walking around thinking Chara insan muta'ahil wa mas'ul ast. So I feel like that was really my blessing growing up with books, because when you grow up in a city in like right on the border of Iran and Iraq, and you look around you, you look at other women, you look at other men, you look at their shoulders crumbling under oppression. You look at different ways that they are trying to make sense of living as a Kurd in this world. And there wasn't anyone that I picked up as a role model. I just didn't want that life. But there were, I could escape that reality, my physical reality through books. And then when I got into university and got to study English literature, that's when I realized that the world was much bigger than what my, unfortunately, Farsi books, because no one really taught me Kurdish at the time, had presented me to. And so I fell in love with Emily Dickinson, Ernest Hemingway, and I fell in love with the language as well, just the art of stories and storytelling. And that's how it started. I think the first book I ever wrote was grade 5. And I also wrote illustrations for my book and was very proud of it at the time, though I'm embarrassed by it now. But I just could find a lot of meaning and solace and calmness in words, in written words.
So I would assume that you did most of your reading in Farsi,
yeah.
Rather than, did you read anything in Kurdish? Because I remember, you know, your house was full of books. We had textbooks when I was a child, but we had a book of poetry in Kurdish. That was the only basically library that we had. And when we came to Tehran, as a matter of fact, we brought that. We did not leave it behind, but because we lived in a military basically place, and Kurdish was not forbidden to be spoken, but the written word was really a sin, unforgivable sin. So you know, I associated Kurdish with fear. So anytime we had people that we didn't know, I would hide the book. But I treasured that book all the time. It belonged actually to my father. And I always looked at it with great curiosity and inquisitiveness, but I was not really able to read it until, you know, I learned how to read Farsi, and then I struggled. So it is interesting, you have published a novel in the English language, which is definitely impeccable. You mentioned Ernest Hemingway and writing basically Farewell to Arms. he revised the ending 47 times. So how is this experience of basically writing in a second, if not a third, basically language? And this really comes down to the whole question of literature and diaspora and the Kurdish, basically, diaspora, which is in many ways unique in itself.
I mean, when I first started writing in English, in a language that, because I was in my 20s when I left Iran on a student visa, everyone told me that this was too late to start learning a language, not so much so that you can communicate in it, because after a while you can write emails and present at work and just have enough command of the language to get by. But to create literary work in your third language, everyone told me that it was impossible. And I was also living as an exiled writer in Canada on my own without any support from family or anyone. And so there were a lot of moments when I thought, well, what options are available for a writer in exile? Why should I even keep writing and push writing? The truth is, I started to think about every other thing that I have been told, and I believed them for a while, and they turned out to be lies. So I was told by people who wholeheartedly and genuinely believed that women were just the inferior sex. That's how God meant it. That's how things are. Look around you and open your eyes, and that's just how this world works. And I had doubts, and after a while I realized that no, this wasn't the truth. It's really not about gender, who you are and your capabilities. And then I was told that because you're Kurdish, when I went to Tehran to study in Allama Tabatabai University, that you're a minority, you don't have a voice, you don't get to talk much. And that also turned out to be a lie. So if I demystify the lies that I was told because of my ethnicity and because of my gender, maybe this third one was also a lie. Maybe it was possible to create literary work in your third language if your heart was really set on it. And then there were two other things. The fact that I just cannot make sense of my life without writing. I don't have other tools of connecting to what's inside me and what's outside me other than through written words. And I've relied on other forms of art in my life. I used to dance professionally. I have loved photography for years, but I can live without dancing and without photography. I just cannot live without writing. So I explored writing, and I wrote in many languages. And more than a writer, I'm honestly a reader. It's a good day if I can write, but it's a very bad day if I can't read. And when you read a lot, and you read a lot in English, then they're the first words that come to your mind when you're trying to express yourself. So it was an uphill battle, not just because I had to believe that I can do it, but also to have the publication world, the publication industry, to believe that it is possible, that I did it and it's doable. And it's been an upstream battle, but it's worth it. I'm glad that I fought that battle. And I'm glad now that after millions of rejection and everything that I went through now, Independent and Globe and Mail and all of those places are writing about the book.
We'll get to those basically obstacles, sometimes insurmountable, really impediments that publishers instinctively or institutionally impose on writers like yourself. You know, we should congratulate you for overcoming basically the gatekeeping practices that at times are draconian and exclusionary and discriminatory. And definitely that is a topic to be discussed separately. But going back to your internal basically motivations for writing, you mentioned several, but it seems to me that writing for you is definitely a compulsion, a necessity, and escapable. George Orwell basically classifies the reasons that writers offer, one of which is a compulsion or necessity, and that is why Orwell basically wrote, and that's why he is still widely read. He was widely read himself, as you said, stressing the connection between reading and writing. But he also mentions egoism. He mentions basically the need to immortalize basically oneself. All those become secondary. So going back to the factors that you enumerated, would you say those were the constituent elements that informed your exploring fiction as a way to bring these social realities to your own attention, primarily to your own consciousness and to the consciousness of the whole world?
Well, writing, I have multiple reasons to write, and that's why I didn't give up despite all those obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is that it's existential. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
it's my philosophy of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's also my way of reflecting on life and understanding things. And plus, there was one more thing I was going to say, that why fiction is a question that I get a lot, because obviously when you're presenting a world that's unfamiliar to your reader, it's so much easier to do it through nonfiction. In
Right.
nonfiction, you can have footnotes, you can have endnotes, you can have a research. But when it comes to fiction, when a Kurdish character talks to another Kurdish characters, they won't say things that they both know, right? They won't say, oh yeah, we are Kurdish and look at our history and our, you know, you won't say, it's just so hard to present an unfamiliar world through fiction, because you have to find a lot of techniques to do that. And how many times can the character walk by when her father turned on the TV and the TV talked about 30 people were killed in Sakhes today because of a protest. So that was a big question for me. Should I write, create fiction or nonfiction if I want to tell the story of the Kurds? Mm-hmm. Which one would be a better medium? But I do believe in the power of stories. I do believe in the kind of learning that happens when we're not aware that we're learning. When you think that you're just reading about Layla and Shia, and when the book ends, you have learned so much about Kurdish history and culture and politics and foods and music and all of that. And because I connect to the rest of the world through their fiction, because fiction helped me in so many ways. And I want to actually pinpoint this fact that one way I was snapped out of my small world of, oh, look at me, I'm so miserable, I'm Kurdish, look at what happens to Kurds, was through fiction that was set in China, in Vietnam, in Africa. And that was a moment when I realized, wait a minute, I'm not alone. You know, Kurds aren't alone. Look at how universal this resistance is across our planet. And look how unoriginal and how predictable the oppressors are in how they copycat each other's method. And that's when I realized that I do belong to a community of readers and writers who travel the world through fiction. And if fiction is what gave me hope and meaning, and if fiction is what transformed me, then I present my best tool to present my heritage. But I have to say, this is always a question in my head all these years. How much do I have to explain Kurds? How much would I allow for the reader to go and research on their own? And then I decided that I'm writing for really intelligent readers, and I want to create a curiosity in them, so they will go pick up a nonfiction book and read about Kurds after reading this story.
Yeah, anyway, you have done basically that beautifully, not only for actually a Kurd who is profoundly involved in the annals of the story, or was basically in my own childhood, I could relate to it in so many different ways. But I would say that any reader would find some basic connection. And I think it is really quite a challenge, an intricate process to create that kind of cultural space across time and place, so that readers from different cultural backgrounds could inhabit, you know, the novel, Daughters of Smoke and Fire, and then primarily come up with the underlying message or messages that they take from this book. Now, if I'm not mistaken, your passage into fiction came through short stories. Now, that doesn't mean writing a short story is any easier, but I would say many novelists really begin with writing short stories and then expand it into, for instance, the broader horizon. If I'm not mistaken, for instance, the author of The Secret Lives of Bees, Susan Kidd Monk, she wrote the first chapter of that book. I don't know if our audience has read the book, a magnificent book. She wrote that, and when she took it to a professor, basically the first chapter of the whole novel she had written, and the professor said, "I hope this is a short story," which was not. She was going to write a novel. And then when she was invited to give a talk at the university or publisher's fair, she went and read that short story. And the publisher and agent came to her and said, you know, "I hope this is the first chapter." So tell us about your story. Did you begin with short stories?
Yes, I sure began with short stories. I think of short stories as a slice of the cake, and then the novel as the whole pie. I did also go through those stages when people tell me, "When are you going to grow up and write a novel?" And I was so offended because creating a short story is actually a very delicate job. You have very little space to characterize and let your characters grow and get your reader involved and give them a sense of conclusion at the end. So I can't say which one I enjoy more now. I certainly enjoy both forms equally. Although when I get to know a character now, I like to spend more time with them. But I have to tell you that I also started as a short story. That was the chapter that I wrote after Farzad was executed. And what is chapter as Farzad, Farzad's chapter in the book right now was how I started. It was one short story about being in prison and what it's like when they come and ask you for interrogation, how interrogations turn into torture. How do prison cellmates try to calm each other down? How can you sing a lullaby in Kurdish to all these prisoners who don't understand Kurdish and still soothe them? And then when that short story was done, I thought about, okay, what if Farzad has a sister? What would her life would be like? What would her, if she had similar ambition, if she also had the same passion for justice that Farzad, that I later called Shia in my book, that Shia has passion for justice. If Layla also had it, and she also has all these barriers, gender barriers, in addition to ethnic barriers, how would their life be similar? How would their life be different? And that's how Layla's story came to mind. And I started Layla at a moment in her life when she's thinking, is life actually worth living? Do I really need to keep going? What's the whole point? And then her ability to tap into her own strength. And that's why I didn't allow Layla to move out of the country easily. I didn't allow Layla to get education, because I feel like what empowered me in life was just getting into universities and education. And then many of the Kurdish women that I work with in our suicide prevention programs, they really don't have this option. So the question was, how can you tap into your strength? How can you find alternative ways if relocation is not an option? So yes, it was definitely a short story turned into chapter. I was told by agents and publishers that we really want a novel. And I said, I'm going to be clever. I'm going to create a collection of short stories that would look like a novel. But it actually ended up being a novel because, just like a lot of other authors, I am an obsessive revisionist. I go through tens and tens of drafts before.
So it's interesting, you know, that's the kind of feeling that I had, but I did not really reveal it. But that's how I was basically reading it. But definitely there is a coherence that binds all the stories that appear to be distinct, separate, but definitely interrelated, that constitute the cohesiveness of the novel. And you just mentioned this idea, you know, it is difficult to sell the idea of such a novel, especially separating, you know, fiction from politics is extremely difficult. you have to be exceptionally good at doing this to be able to sell the idea. And I'm glad that you did. Could you, for a change, pick a segment? You know, I have so many interesting segments that I find interesting. I don't want to dictate to you. You would have many quotable texts, I would assume, in the future. So, please.
Sure. I mean, the section it's going to be short. I don't want people to fall asleep. So what I'm going to read for you is chapter 6. And this is when Layla and Chia's father, for the first time, opens about his own experience. If you are Kurdish, you don't need me to tell you that a lot of time parents, in order to shield their children, they don't share their problems and what they went through politically harassed with their children. But this specific night, he's drunk enough to talk, and he doesn't see Layla because Layla is hiding behind the door, peeking, and he's not aware. So Alan, that everyone calls Baba, starts speaking, and Chia is the one that keeps trying to prompt him. So Chia asks, why do they torture people when they have not committed a crime and who only believe in something other than what they're told to? My brother straightened his spine and sat cross-legged on the rug in front of my father, as if expecting him to be able to explain. Baba glanced at his son for only, then back at the dark screen of the television. It reflected his bald head, his baggy trousers, and short-sleeved undershirt. He picked up a newspaper and shuffled the pages. Rotten propaganda. He threw it away, scratched his mustache with his index finger. Chia pressed his luck. How would it happen when you were in prison? At midnight, Baba said, they would call names. We were 80 inmates in one wing, sometimes more, sometimes less. Anyone whose name was called after the sun went down never came back. I pricked up my ears from my invisible post. Baba's gaze remained on the flowers woven into the rug, his expression neutral, reminiscent. We would listen to and count the gunshots right before sunrise, and with a fork, we'd engrave the dates and the estimated number of people executed on the walls of our cells. I steadied myself on the doorframe. My brother sat rigidly. Baba continued stoically. Every time that loudspeaker cracked, every time a guard turned it on and blew into it, every time someone whose name started with A was called, he stopped and glanced at Chia, through Chia, as if Chia weren't there. The ones who were called had only a moment to give their friends and cellmates any useful belongings they had. A shirt, a pair of shoes, a comb. And they might ask for something to be returned to their parents, wives, or children. Their diaries, drawings, handicraft they had made in prison with inedible dough. Then their friends. Baba squeezed his eyes shut, bit at the corner of his cracked, bloodless lips. After the men were taken away, their friends would light a candle if they had one, would pass around some dates if they had any, and would shed tears if they still had some left in them, that kind of stuff. They would gather the few possessions they had to give the executed something like a funeral, an acknowledgement of their existence in a place that wished to annihilate us all. Chia cleared his throat and asked in a gravely voice, was that the worst moment when a friend was taken? My father looked away, rubbed his face, and pressed his finger to his temple, as if he were focusing on something. I wanted to run and grab a glass of water for Baba, whose lips had dried up, but I stayed put. Once, a plainclothes man walked in with a flashlight in his hand. Baba wheezed, looked the other way. Memories were crowding in. I held my breath so I wouldn't miss a single word. 3 guards followed the man who was clearly an Etalad agent. The intelligence service, Chia breathed. Baba continued. It was past midnight, and the central lights of the prison had all been turned off. We were about 12 cellmates then, Joanna's husband among us. Their daughter was due to be born the day after. We were ordered to stand in a line and face this figure who walked before us, directing his flashlight at us. He pointed his index finger and ordered an unlucky prisoner to step forward from the line. His blinding light then flashed into my face. I shut my eyes and frowned on a reflex. Baba's lips stayed low, slurring his speech. My heart was beating too loudly, and I worried his pounding would drown out Baba's next word. And? Chia prompted softly. Baba sighed, the deepest sigh. Somehow the monster decided to move on to the next person and beckoned him out of the lineup. He didn't bother to call names, check the prisoner's file. He was so damn sure he would get away with it all. He could have ordered the light to be turned on in a snap. Nothing would have happened to him even then, but he didn't bother. He took 8 men. Baba's features were tight, his breathing so labored, I felt he was reliving the terror. Did you ever hear what happened to those 8 men? Was Schiller's father one of the 8? He was. They're buried in Lana Tawa. Baba didn't wait for Chia to ask what Lana Tawa was. The cursed place. Mass graves where prisoners are taken after execution, or if they die under torture, or if the subjects are just kidnapped or disappeared, or if their families can't afford to pay the bullet fees. There was a long pause. Our region was one huge mass grave. Some lay silent, some cried out from under the earth. My father needed nursing just as much as the helpless Kurds in Iran, the homeless ones in Iraq, the hopeless ones in Turkey, and the stateless ones in Syria. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Very moving. I mean, this interaction between Leila and her father, definitely this is the first time that after probing and so many futile attempts by Leila, as you said, probably because he was semi-intoxicated, he reveals basically what happened to him. Gradually a man who is really admired, he is a true hero, but definitely that imprisonment, the monstrosity really turns him into more or less a callous, phlegmatic, indifferent character, which really is tragic. Now, when I was reading the book, for instance, I always thought, okay, there should be something unique about basically Leila, that no one else, has created this. And going back to the segment that you read, which is exemplary, the ways in which you create characters, basically characters that really have intense lives, but yet, humor seems to be integral to Leila's life. The irony with which basically she sees this situation that even Chia, who happens to be a very highly educated, sophisticated, vigorous, intellectual with feminist basically tendencies and ideas, and in a way, he brings a certain level of consciousness to what you see, which is your everyday reality as a young girl, as a child, when Leila was a child, so on and so forth. The kind of humor that I basically remember, and I thought your presence of mind, meaning Leila's presence of mind, was just quite astonishing to me. So there is a conversation between Chia and you, and Chia is wondering, why Kurdish women basically suffer so much, and why they are some of them are led to set themselves on fire because of basically the honor culture that is prevalent in some parts of Kurdistan, even though going back to the 18th century, women have played a distinct role that even Europeans, for instance, didn't know in terms of political and social leadership. And then Chia asks, you know, what happened to Kurdish women? And I thought, you know, okay, so yeah, I couldn't think of that question until Leila says, what happened to Kurdish men?
Yes.
So I got a kick out of it.
Yeah. I don't mean to interrupt you, sorry. I just wanted to say that was another one of my challenge alongside the others. And how do you, because when I read Kurdish history, I need to take breaks between chapters, you know, it's just too much. I have to have other books that I read in the middle of them in order to be able to keep reading. So, but while I have to be truthful to what Kurds have experienced, how do I create a book that people can read, you know? And so humor was definitely one of the things I tried to sprinkle across the novel. Also food, like I wanted them to talk about yummy food, and I got a lot of them from Lokman's restaurant, like Maladiz and those funny names. And yeah, it's definitely hard. Like I had to even fight with my publisher about that section about Alan, when Alan witnesses the massacre. Yes. They were so strong about it that no, you have to remove this chapter, no one can read it. And I pulled my hair out. I'm like, we have lived through this. How can people not read 5 pages of massacre? They can just skip that 5 pages, but there is more to say. Then it's just so difficult. I was asked then by Washington Review of Books about the difference between life and fiction. And I said, well, in fiction, you have to have a balance between joy and suffering. But that's not what happens in life. A lot of times you don't really have a whole lot of balance between the two.
Right, of course, you know, there are stereotypical definitions of what fiction is. And then, of course, the attempt to dismantle, you know, traditional definitions of what fiction is. And obviously, you know, we try to pigeonhole or use these established taxonomies to identify work of literature. But I personally see this as a major contribution to novelistic, basically, discourse, particularly in the context of diaspora, the Kurdish diaspora, which is really very different. And it takes much more than can, you know, anyone from the mainstream society can imagine to become such a writer, to navigate across and between these multiple basically worlds, which, for instance, Leila, the protagonist, belong to. And the ability basically to sense and not to become senseless, and to rise, to transcend basically those characters, and to be able to lay the foundation for some kind of a change in the real world. Because, you know, what happens really in fiction is what has happened. But when it comes to politics, what should happen, what will happen would be entirely different.
Absolutely.
And of course, Leila has this aspiration to be a filmmaker, and she eventually becomes one. But in Iran, it is impossible for her because of linguistic, cultural, academic, economic, basically discrimination, all kinds of pressures that are applied to all the Iranian segments, ethnic minorities and women, and ethnic women in particular. So let me ask you this question. I'm getting ready to wrap this up. Do you think your contribution has dismantled this gatekeeping practices in the Western world in a way, you know, this dichotomy between fiction and realism, politics, and the fact that who gets to be published and who is to be silenced?
So one level is the decision of what books get to be published. And then the second decision is, would this book get a review in New York Times or not? Because everyone's eyes is in the book section of the New York Times. While I was writing this book, there were a lot of agents and editors who just straightforward told me, don't even try. Don't even write at all. And that was really brutal, because it's one thing to say, I don't connect this story, this is not for me, I don't like this. And it's very different from telling someone, don't ever follow your passion, you're gonna be really bad at it. And so again, because I'm Kurdish, because I know how to resist, and I know how to come out of my own ashes like a phoenix. And I think this is a lesson every Kurd has learned. I kept writing, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna write. Maybe no one will ever read this, but it will make me happy. I'm just happy to create, you know. It's my right to create, and they can't take away my right to create. And then eventually, when you write for thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, you finally reach a stage that your writing can be compared to the writing of people who write in their first language. And then that's the stage when it's difficult to ignore you now. And so, yes, this book has been published. It's amazing that the publication house is called the Overlook Press. And they are a kind of publication house that specialize in fiction that's overlooked by mainstream media. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what's published in North America, most specifically in USA, it's just, even if it's about other, the non-dominant group, it's just trauma porn, like American Dirt, right? These are books that don't offer actually genuine experience. They're just, you know,
for the marketplace.
Yeah, so the book is out there, but will it get somewhere where it will be part of the Kurdish studies, for example, the Middle Eastern studies in the universities? It's something that's really not in my hand anymore. While I was writing it, while I was trying to get an agent and get a publisher, I could keep pushing for it, but from now on, it's in your hand and the audience's hand to see if they will, first of all, genuinely enjoy it, and then if they do, then can they help get this book the attention that they think it might deserve? Has it changed something? It's really too soon to know. I guess we will know in a few years. I think the process for this book will be slow because no one's excited to read about Kurds, you know? It's not like sex or cake or alcohol.
I may slightly disagree with you, Ava. And I think, you know, we live in a capitalist basically system, and book publishing is an economic basically enterprise under capitalism. And therefore, you know, if you have more and more basically readers, definitely you would have a more actual, not just potential market if the book is promoted assertively and people feel obliged basically to read this book. You know, we are all about stories, and this is really the story of the stories that the characters basically tell, and you miraculously, skillfully, you know, bring those stories to life. In the context of Kurds, I would say Buchani, basically with No Friends But the Mountains, he contributed not only a magnificent, basically, novel from Manus Island, where he was a refugee. You know, the refugee discourse primarily came to us through what is application, and then it really gradually, you were right, it began to capture the imagination of the world and shake even the world. So yours, in a way, finds itself in a more favorable social and cultural context, not only because of the struggles of the Kurdish people, but also because of the contributions that Kurdish diaspora has recently, in recent years, I mean, has made to not only literature, but different fields of inquiry, including basically academically. So I'm hopeful, but hope does not solve the issue. I think what it takes really is an aggressive marketing basically strategy and encouraging people to purchase the book. So if Nima could go over this page once again, he is probably more familiar with it now. And then when we come back, I will ask 2 or 3 questions, and then the floor would be open for questions and answers.
So which page did you want to go to?
The page we are on. You don't have to go anywhere. Just tell us, where we can and how we can get the book. If Ava definitely is more familiar with the page, she could do that herself.
Okay.
But listen to her.
I don't really have, I don't think I can change the screen, but.
I can let you share what you like. Do you want to share your
I don't
screen?
really have anything special. I think anyone can go to the website and get the information they need. Yeah.
So there are multiple ways in which you can get the book: through Amazon, through Barnes and Nobles, through basically, what is this? Inside?
IndieBound, that's where it's a list of all the independent bookstores. So you put in your zip code and it tells you the closest local bookstore to you.
And there is an audio version of the book.
Right, yes. There is an Audible, you can listen to the book. There is a Kindle version that you can get on your phone. There's a hardback, and then there is a paperback. So it's been offered in a variety of ways and for a variety of budgets.
And I don't want to commercialize basically your work, but definitely it is at a very affordable price, given the high price that books basically these days have. So it is really an affordable price. Obviously, when you read the book, it would be great. A part of that campaign that we were talking about, breaking down the gatekeepers' impediments, is really to write reviews and so on and so forth, so that the work becomes pervasively available textually, visually, and through basically, for instance, this Zoom conference that we will try to spread. So you have done actually the work. I'm not saying that you should take care of all these marketing basically tricks and trades, so to speak. That is definitely our responsibility to a certain extent.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that whether or not I can find a publisher for my next book, and I'm writing a book that talks about the experience of the Yazidi Kurdistan, very much depends on the number of sales. So because my career, I don't really make money out of these books. I make $1 per book, and that's not why I'm writing. I just want to be able to find a publisher for my next book. So it very much depends on the numbers, the numbers of sales. And people may not know it, but writing a review on Amazon, it actually helps a lot, because Amazon works based on algorithm more than anything. And a book that receives reviews then will be presented to other people when they're browsing for books. And so there's a lot you can do, is what I'm trying to say. You can help a lot in promoting Kurdish literature and writing in diaspora.
Yes, so definitely we will do our part, and we will ask others basically to do their part. And word of mouth is a powerful basically means, and hoping that the vicious coronavirus gives in, and we can interactively in reality, attend your book signing ceremonies that you are invited to, bookstores all over the United States and Canada. And that is something that definitely pride of. And we just have to live with basically this virtual promotion and presentation of your work.
And I'm so grateful to you and to everyone. Thank you so much.
And
for showing up.
One last question.
Means a lot.
This is not a marketing pitch, even though I have a master's degree in marketing.
You sure do. This is the hardest part for me. I want to go hide in a cave and write.
Yeah.
Thank you.
thank you for all the participants who are here. After this question, definitely the floor would be open. You could use chat to ask questions, or you could just simply come forth and ask your question. And my question is, why should this book really matter to readers of all kinds, Kurds and non-Kurds?
The power of stories, really. And the good thing about literature is that, at least my experience is that every time I read literature, I understand myself better. I understand my world better. It makes it easier for me to navigate my way around the world. And so I think anyone who's interested in stories, anyone who is interested in the power of books that help you go in the skin of someone else and be someone else for a while, for the 200, 300 pages, be a woman, you know, be a transgender for 200 pages, be in Africa, be in Asia, be in the Middle East. So what it offers, it's unique in the sense that it talks about Kurdish experience, and I think a lot of Kurds will find themselves in the book. There will be moments when they say, this is my story, this is my life. And it's also universal in the sense that really a lot of human experience is universal.
Indeed, I would say, if I could finish by this sentence, that really the world of fiction captures the unconquerable world. And this is not just in the realm of fantasy, but also in reality. And for that reason, I think you have done a fantastic job. You know, you have conquered so many basically stories that anyone who reads basically the book, the experience of the reading would be a very enriching, enlightening experience. So no one, after reading this book, should indefinitely or infinitely feel conquered, because, you know, we are our own stories, and we can basically rise above all limitations to retell, relate those stories to the entire world. And this is not just a story of Kurds, it is really a global story. Congratulations again.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Dr. Amir, I think you made me to put it in my top of the list to read. I haven't received mine, despite the fact I was among those that ordered it the first, but I haven't received it. But I could not wait. I read I listened on Amazon to the segment. It was amazing. And now I listened to Ava. Congratulations again. And I'm sure, for me as a person who is very story touches my heart, I know it's about other people. So it's amazing that you could, through such a story and creating such an agency, go through people's heart and home. Thank you again.
Appreciate it. It only took 10 years.
Yeah, I'm sure it's and a lot of it.
You would appreciate this, Dr. Soraya, more, since really this is the story of women,
yeah.
In particular. Connie?
You're muted, Connie.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
I'm on part 3 of your book. I'm enjoying it very much.
Thank you so much.
The line that I really liked is your description of men. Their honor depends on their women. Men. You use that line twice on page 96 and in the introduction. My question has to do with page 66. You end one chapter with a reference to Turtles Can Fly. And you say that the American soldiers raped that protagonist, or that woman in the film. And I, long time ago, watched the film. So I went to Google. I Googled it to make sure that that was accurate. what I found out was that the Bahman Gobadi wanted to say that she was raped, but there was no reference to if she was raped by American. I don't know if you deliberately did that. I mean, it's a work of fiction, I understand. It's not footnoted. And if so, why? I don't mean to say American soldiers are angels. War is organized crime let loose. Horrible things happen in wars. It's like an earthquake. There are no winners. But I wanted to see why you highlighted that point.
Have you seen the movie, Connie?
I have.
In the scene when she's surrounded by these people speaking in English, I think.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
They are specifically. I don't know what you read, but in the book, it's specifically soldiers. Yeah.
In the film, you mean?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Then I have to ask Bahman Gobadi why he highlighted that point.
Well, I mean, there is a lot of crime that happened there. We know what happened in Abu Ghraib and.
No, I'm not trying to say American soldiers are angels.
I don't know why he made that decision, but that's what the movie suggests.
Okay.
I mean, regardless of that, I think this was the story of how she and her brother dealt with that. To me, it was a brother-sister relationship as well. A turtle can fly, and just the idea of flying regardless.
Yeah. I'll ask one other question then. Do you think this book could be published in Kurdistan?
In Bashur, there is a lot of interest in translating it. In Rojava, I don't think restrictions would allow it. Do you think it would be published in Bakur?
Well, I mean, Layla is very spunky. It's very, you cannot contain her. She's, challenging the status quo. And I have left, Kurdistan 40 years ago. And if Layla lived in 1980 in Kurdistan, like in Bakur, I have to tell you this: she would be eliminated. She would not be left. She wouldn't be left alone. So I like the fact that you challenged the status quo. You challenged the established norms. All that is wonderful. I think our women need to think, for themselves, and our men, they don't have to. Their honor doesn't need to depend on, on their women. So I'm enjoying it very much. I look forward to finishing it.
Thank you. I just wanted to say the reason I use that line, honor dependent on men, is because one of the ways that I don't think it's patriarchy as a thing that benefits men. I think the fact that the idea of masculinity depends on someone else's body, that you can prove how much of a man you are based on how much you can control another human, is a disservice to men as well. That it's such a fragile thing to maneuver in the world. And it's sad. It's sad if your identity depends on how much you suppress someone else. And I just hope that more and more men get to see that patriarchy is not helping them. It's actually totally creating an unhealthy situation. And it's amazing to me that a lot of feminist men that I know are the men who witnessed how much their mothers were abused. And these are mothers that these children, these boys, loved and admired and saw how much she suffered, and they realized that this is not right. So who says that patriarchy is good for men? It's definitely not.
Any other questions? Please feel free to ask any questions that you may have.
Luqman sent a message. Thank you, Luqman. Your restaurant and your foods were very, very inspiring.
I think I have a question for Ava. First of all, congratulations. I'm so excited for this book, and I just tried to order online. I actually want to ask about the cover picture.
Yeah, the Schler. Yes.
Normally, as a Kurds, because we are really very fond of the fire and the smoke and everything, I was expecting to see fire and smoke over the cover. But then when I saw this plant, I don't know the English name. It's crown
Crown
something.
lilies, yes.
Yeah. And I just wanted to know, how did you decide this cover, and why not smoke and fire? So instead you choose that one. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much for your question. So as Amir also pointed out, these things are not exactly my decisions. Like if you look at the Canadian cover, you see a completely different one. It's a woman touching the wall, and there is poppies that she's touching. And I wanted the cover, I really advocated for Schleer as my design, and luckily the US publisher listened to me, because I think it's the most beautiful non-political representative of Kurds. I love the flower because it grows across the Kurdistan plateau regardless of the border. I like how much that flower doesn't care for borders. I love that it comes in such vibrant colors. It's red, it's orange, it's yellow, and it just doesn't care about all the bloodshed and injustice and suffering that goes on. Not that it doesn't care, but it grows in those colors despite the tough conditions. And I like how it's humble. It's looking down. And I like that it has this crown that's planted on it. So there's so much about this flower that I love, and that's why I named one of my characters also Schleer. In terms of the title, we went through a lot of back and forth as well with the publisher and the title. You won't believe how many times they put a photo of a woman with a hijab on my book. And how many times I screamed and said, you can't do that to me. If you do that, I'm not going to promote this book at all. And I came all this way to be free from hijab. Leave me alone. It is not Kurdish culture. Kurdish culture has nothing to do with it. Then in terms of the title also, it was called Warrior Butterflies. It was called The Sun Will Be Our Witness, in one of the moments when the prisoners are taken to be executed. One of the girls, Shirin, looks up at the sky and says, "Sun, you be our witness." So between all these titles, it was something, Daughters of Smoke and Fire was really something that my publisher came up with, if you want to know the truth. And they voted on it. And because I had fought for the hijab to be removed, and that delayed everything, it delayed when the cover was ready, it delayed when the advanced copies were ready, I had to pick my battles. And I liked the idea of Smoke and Fire because of Nowruz, and also because of the idea of women's self-immolation in Rosh Halal. So it's not, I'm not saying I didn't like the title, but I fought for the cover more than I fought for the title. And they make these decisions, I don't know really, based on their own algorithm and stuff.
Right, and that makes the title actually quite resonant and I think generally appropriate, despite, you know, the underlying negative, basically, imagery. But you have to look at the whole context. You mentioned Schleer is not only the name of a wild, basically, flower in Kurdistan, throughout Kurdistan, but it is the name of one of the main characters who is a source of inspiration for Layla. And she eventually basically takes up arms against invaders, Daesh and other invaders in Rojava. Therefore, after, of course, she was imprisoned and brutally tortured, she lost the kidney, but she never gave up. She had this, you know, fiery spirit that no one could basically contain. A romantic, basically, relationship with Shia does not really stop her from carrying on the struggle, a feminist liberation, basically, movement or struggle. So I would say this double, in a way, metaphorical connotation of Schleer in the context of what happens to Schleer at the end would make the title more appropriate.
I think I have a question for Ava.
Go ahead.
My question would be like, why we don't have like that many counter stories in like from Kurdish of Iran? Do you think is it because of lack of language, like in it, like people don't know how to how to write in Kurdish, or do you think it's like fear of like exposing that culture and what has been like happened to Kurds in Iran, especially in like among women?
So your question is, why aren't there more stories about Iranian Kurds?
I'm saying like why like people in Iran, especially like Kurdish women, like don't write these kind of counter stories? Is it because of the lack of language like in Kurdish, or is it like something else?
Thank you for your question, Shiva. Again, I don't know if I can talk for all the women in Rojhelat. The group that I deal with specifically are the most vulnerable. And so I work with women who, when we hold suicide prevention workshops for them, some of them at the end of the workshop say to me, the only thing we have left in this world is our right to die. And do you want to even take that away from us? So what do other writers write? Do we have, like, when I wanted to choose a poetry for the beginning of my book, I really looked hard to find something by a woman. I mean, I love Shirko because it's amazing that he is in there and he sets the tone, what he says in there. But it's been such a challenge to find a lot of stories and poems by Kurdish women that I would love to translate in English and use it in Kurdish. Shiva, again, I know as much as you do. I mean, you know, it's so hard. I know heroes in stories, in books, there are a lot of heroes that overcome a lot of obstacles. And that's why they are inspiring, because they're so different from the rest of the world and what happens. I mean, if you live in that culture where abuse and violence is normalized, and I'm not talking just about physical abuse, I'm talking about like emotional, verbal abuse in such a deeply misogynistic country, how many options do you have? Do you even get to write? I mean, it goes back to the question of who has the luxury to write? Who gets to tell whose story? You know, there are a lot of answers, and you mentioned a couple of them, but I can't really talk for every man out there. I don't know what's going on. I just know that it's extremely, extremely hard. But definitely language is one of hundreds of problems.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi all, I don't have a question for Ava again, but it's very nice to see you all safe and healthy. We just got the book, lucky.
Yes.
So I can't wait to read it. We are having a contest with Dylan. Dylan saying, I'm gonna read it first. I'm gonna read it first. So congratulations. We are so proud of you.
Thank you so much.
Just hang in there, guys. We miss you. We miss you guys. We miss you
so very much. Thank you so much for showing up and for supporting. Okay, I think, Amir, what do you think? I think people are tired. Maybe we'll let them go.
I don't know. Susan always has good questions. I don't know what happened to you, Susan.
Nothing happened, sorry.
You're on mute, Susan.
Well, I'll ask one more question if I can.
Okay.
Whose books were they when you say you went to Kurdistan and your house was filled with books? You grew up in their shades. Whose books were they and what kind of books were they?
Oh my God, it's embarrassing. Do you want me to actually tell you? So it was, so the books were great. There were a lot of poetry books and novels. It's just, they were all in Farsi. We didn't really have a Kurdish book. The only Kurdish book that I ever got exposed to was because my mother liked to dump me at Kanun Parvarish Fikri Kudakan wa Nojawanan, and that was basically a library where kids could go and read. And I loved to be there all day. And that's where I came across a book that says Esther Akan Slav, right? Halo of stars. And I worked really, really hard to be able to read that book. It was tiny and it was small, and I just loved reading it. That's all I remember now. But I have to say I owe a lot of how I see life to Maulana Rumi, and I'm so glad that we had so many books by him and our house, although it wasn't the easiest thing to read. But just the rhythm of Diwan al-Shams was very appealing to me as a child, and I had a lot of it by heart. Hafiz as well. So there was a lot of Persian literature in our house, a lot of that. I'm embarrassed to say now, but at one point I used to think highly of even Ali Shariati, not his books on Islam and politics, but his literary work, Kavir, Hubud dar Kavir, and Pedar Madar Mutahamim, and things like that. I think what is important was just getting into the habits of when I want to relax, I pick up a book. When I want to shift my focus in life from something that's unpleasant to something else, I pick up a book. When I'm happy, I pick up a book. When I'm sad, I pick up a book. So in that sense, they helped a lot. But in terms of what I do read now that I get to choose what I can read, I love literary fiction that is insightful, not so much for the story that they tell you, but for how much you'll learn about how the world works and doesn't through stories that Zadie Smith or Richard Flanagan says. When I talked about it was important for me to know what Kurds go through isn't unique to Kurds, I learned it through Tommy Orange's book, There, which is a collection of stories about the experience of Native Americans, or Ocean Vuong's story about inheriting trauma, what it's like to be in Vietnam during the war, and what it's like to be the child of a Vietnamese who went through the war. And so I highly recommend literary fiction, but definitely books are good saviors.
I have quite a few of my students present, and I'm really happy that they have joined us. This is a part of basically academic and cultural socialization. There are a couple of questions that came to me through chat. The first question is, do you think that this book will help bring some mental health awareness in minority cultures, going back to the whole topic of diaspora, immigrants, refugees, assimilation, all these different basically types of diasporic discourse that we have? In essence, this is a very good question. Reading this book, to what extent do you think it is, therapeutic for, let's say, minority cultures?
I think it's great to feel heard and feel seen. And maybe that's why I'm so drawn into fictions that represent minorities myself, because it's a mirror that reflects back my own awkwardness and imperfection back to me, but also humanizes me. So yes, I do think that it will bring some awareness in the sense that the stigma is taken away, and then you feel like it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to have some problems and obstacles while you're trying to figure things out around you. I hope that, and this is what I see in the reviews, you should read for yourself, but I hope that any other minority group that picks this book up somehow to some extent can feel seen, can feel heard, can feel understood.
Exactly, and that is in essence really a remedy for any kind of malady, and mental in particular. Primarily, I would say that Layla's quest for freedom from the shackles of patriarchy, from the shackles of the Islamic Republic of Iran, brutalizing and a brutalized basically culture, in essence is a struggle for intellectual, mental, really liberation before anything else. And she doesn't really feel free until she breaks down through her outspokenness, all these barriers. Another question that comes from Oshana is, hi Ava, I logged into this meeting, so I missed some part of the conversation, but I would like to know your inspiration behind this book. Is there a particular message you are trying to convey to your readers, and what do you hope your readers will gain from reading your book, even though you mentioned this briefly at some point?
Right. Oshana, thank you for your question. So when you write fiction, it's important to not have a specific message or lesson that you're trying to preach. I'm trying to tell a story, and what people take out of that story is really their interpretation and how they like to read it and what they try to get it. If you definitely notice this, that when we go back to books at different stages of our life, we understand them differently, right? So what would people understand from this book is really personal and their choice. But in terms of what I really like to achieve, I like to tell a good story, and in doing that, I like to put a human face on Kurdish struggle. I like to people to understand that, and this is somehow the ending of the book too, when Layla said, "As a Kurd, I don't like to be looked down upon," because that's what Kurds experienced for decades. And then when suddenly Islamic State rose, then everybody realized that, oh, Kurds are these brave people who can defeat ISIS, and now they were looking up at us. And I would like to be looked into and be accepted with all our imperfections and with all our awkwardness and funniness, and just like any other group of humans. I think the problem with our world, the reason we're so exclusive, is because we have a group of, and George Orwell and others also talk about it, we have people and we have unpeople, right? We have lives that we grieve for, and we have ungrievable lives. So all these refugees who lose their lives in these and across the ocean when they're trying to get to their safety, who gets to grieve their lives, right? So how can we make sure that we hopefully have a world where everyone's life is valuable? And I hope this book contributes to that in some way. That's my hope.
If I may say something, I just remember this scene, which I really found it to be heart-wrenching and appalling, and that is when Layla basically goes into the grave of the brother, and the family is not even allowed to bury Chia, and they have to do that in the wee hours. And so it is excruciatingly, basically, really painful. And so many people have experienced that, not only in Kurdistan, but throughout the world, that grieving, basically, families have no recourse to justice. I mean, what kind of justice is this, that even the family of the executed cannot grieve, and they have to bury the dead secretly in the thick of the night. Zozan, did you have a question?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I didn't recognize my name. A more practical question. This has been so exciting. I've loved hearing you talk and read about your book. I didn't know he was going to be executed. That's the sad part.
Amir.
Yeah, I didn't want to know. It's Dr. Amir ruined it for me. I didn't want to know Chia is dying.
Anyway,
Oh my God.
that is not the secret. Who is not executed in Iran? That's a known fact.
Anyway, my question is, when can we have a Kurdish gathering here in Southern California? And I was hoping maybe Diaries could look into the park, whether it's open yet or not. I just noticed today that the county park that's down the street from us is open now. So I was hoping that, I don't know what the rules are about gatherings and so on, but
Stay 6 feet apart. We should be okay.
Social distancing.
Oh, and I also want to thank Nima and Amir for organizing this. And
Oh, it's all Amir, nothing to do with me.
And such a treat to hear this and participate in this. And I know other people want to do it too. That's why I'm asking, realistically, you think maybe in another month we might be able to? Can he look, or who reserves the park when we have these picnics and gatherings? Who?
There's a lot of background noise. I don't know if people could mute.
Exactly. If you could mute, probably it is from the host himself. But
it was me, sorry.
That's a great idea once we can. There is another question coming from Daniela. Hello, Ava. Thank you for taking the time to being here. My question is, what is your advice for beginning writers? What kind of habits or tips would you offer to someone who wants to make this a career for themselves?
Right. Thank you for your question, Danielle. I think what I would tell a beginner writer is what I wish someone had told me when I started, because it's such a difficult path to be on. And I think the first question every aspiring writer should ask themselves is, why exactly am I writing? And how many obstacles am I willing to overcome to write? Because writing is so much of a sacrifice, like, because you can't earn a living with it, right? So you have to always have a job on site. And so every day when you're trying to write, you ask yourself, what do I give up on today? You know, because you can't have a fully social life and a job and write, and also because you can't just write, you have to read all the time in order to write. So there's hours that you have to dedicate to this every day. So ask yourself, why am I writing? And see what question actually comes back to you. And if your question is, if the answer is strong enough, then it doesn't matter what habits or tips people tell you. You figure out what works for you, right? I write better after I take long walks, right? I can't write in the morning. I write at night. Is that something that would work for you? You will figure it out definitely once you know why you're writing and that you are willing to do it despite all the challenges.
Right. So I personally enjoy basically writing, but I also teach supposedly writing. But I always tell my students, you know, I do the impossible thing. It is impossible to teach writing. Writing is not teachable. It is, as you said, Ava, it is learnable. And I think, you know, we need some kind of a gusto or zest, some kind of basically genuine feeling or compulsion or necessity. And Connie probably as a prolific writer also has his own side to this story. And in a way, writing is basically the quest for answering that question, really. But hopefully we are not able to answer that question because we don't want to run out of ideas for writing. Jomara asks, how do you think this book would relate to the times we are living in with COVID-19?
Jomara, that's a really good question. When this pandemic started, that's what I was thinking about. It's a very difficult time. There is no denial. And it's a lot more difficult on the vulnerable population, for sure. But then it's such a humbling and sobering reminder of how ridiculous our borders are. Like how connected we are, how much we are part of a family, despite everything we make with race and religion and politics and borders to separate us from each other. Look, what happens in one part of the world can shut down the entire world. Isn't that the time for us to wake up? And I think in this way, if we are willing then to open our eyes and accept how much we need each other and how much we can survive through this by taking care of each other, then this book is definitely a step in understanding the other and the unknown, right? Yeah, it's just been, it's been hard, but it's been, I think, very, it's been a good wake-up call, don't you think, Tomorrow?
I'm thinking how long it takes for justice.
I think, you know, the fact that now we do have really semiotically at our disposal a multitude of resources, textual, visual, even tactile, to explore basically the written word, and also perhaps, you know, deceptively saying that we have time to enjoy reading what we like to read, and read basically in multiple formats rather than just, you know, the traditional way of reading. And definitely I would say the coronavirus, despite all its monstrosity, has brought to the fore the need for a textual, basically, presence, a textual being, a textual, becoming, in a way. And definitely, this technology is very helpful, locally, globally, cognitively, intellectually. All these things really happen to converge on this technology that we are using to stay in touch despite the ordeal of the vicious, basically, coronavirus. Definitely this forum had its own advantages and disadvantages. I don't want to magnify and glorify virtual space as if it was reality, but definitely it offers certain advantages and privileges that we would not have in the actual physical reality, in the ways in which we use all these multiple semiotic resources to present and promote the marvelous, basically, work of Ava Homa. To see her basically in person definitely would be a much different experience. But each mode of communication definitely has its own advantages and disadvantages. Definitely we have to draw on the advantages of this new mode of communication. And I think perhaps this forum, in essence, made that message to some extent transparent.
All right, well, once again, thank you, everyone.
So Jamara
Thank you
agrees
so
with
much.
you, Ava.
Yes.
And again, we thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much, Dr. Soraya. Thank you. I love you.
I love you. And I'm very, very happy I listened to you more. And thank you
I can't
so
wait
much.
to listen to you. Hopefully next week.
Thank you. And Dr. Amir and Nima again for everything, and every one of you that attended. Very, very great questions, wonderful answers. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you again.
Take care.
Bye.
Stay well.
Everybody, hope to see you all soon.
Bye, Shema.
If you have any questions, we can stay on. If not, Nima, would you stop recording?
Thank you, Sanya, Jamara.
Stop share.
All right.